Hey, you're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Every week, I sit down with another journalist to talk about the biggest local news and how it affects us here in the Pacific Northwest. And here with me once again, he is the City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. And yet his Twitter feed is mostly about the Mariners and sometimes some rich people drama, but we'll get into that. It's David Kroman. David, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's kind of the best use of Twitter these days, I find, is sports and jokes.
Yeah, sports and live things like the Oscars or the Olympics, things like that. Well, we do have, speaking of sports, a big sports story up first on front page. So let's get right to that.
I have to thank the organization led by John Schneider and, of course, the team, the players. We love you guys. We love the legends, led by Mike McDonald.
That is Seahawks chair Jody Allen, the sister of the late Microsoft co-founder and team owner Paul Allen, after the Hawks' big win just 10 days ago, not very long ago. The reports and speculation have been circulating for weeks, and now it is confirmed. The Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks are going up for sale. I'm going to read quickly from this press release because it's a doozy from Seahawks.com. Quote, the estate of Paul G. Allen today announced it has commenced a formal sale process for the Seattle Seahawks NFL franchise, consistent with Allen's directive to eventually sell his sports holdings and direct all estate proceeds to philanthropy. The estate has selected investment banks, and there's a couple names for investment banks, to lead the sale process, which is estimated to continue through the 2026 off-season. NFL owners must then ratify a final purchase agreement. And that's it. 2 paragraphs on the Seahawks website announcing a pretty monumental move. Your thoughts here, David? I think a lot of fans are sitting up and feeling some anxiety today because this is a big change.
It is a big change. It's also not unexpected. This was the plan the whole time. As you know, as the statement referred to, the estate was always going to be sold off. When the Trailblazers went up for sale, which Paul Allen also owned over the summer, it was pretty clear that they were moving into the sports parts of his massive estate, which I think was estimated at somewhere around $20 billion. And then there were some reports before the Super Bowl that this would happen right after the Super Bowl. There were some kind of strange denials of the Seahawks saying the Seahawks are not up for sale right now, which of course doesn't preclude the fact that they were about to go on sale as they have. So, again, this is not surprising. It was going to happen. It's a little strange, the timing coming right after the Super Bowl, though at the same time, maybe that'll ease some folks' fear because, we have this goodwill that we're carrying forward. And no matter what happens, we have this year's Super Bowl. I think Jody Allen is such an interesting figure because by all accounts, she was sort of a reluctant sports owner to start. Because this was basically bequeathed to her, but then...
Yeah, not your classic, idea of a wealthy person who's just like a huge football fan who decides to get into it. This was her taking over her brother's gigantic estate.
Which I'm sure for her carried a lot of emotional weight as well, but by all accounts, she kind of embraced the role and had some positive reviews, but, the NFL is pretty clear that individuals need to own teams, not estates, the exception being the Green Bay Packers, which is owned cooperatively, but they banned that after the 1980s. So this was always going to be sold to an individual. The question is who and at what price?
Yeah. So the Wall Street Journal had this report last month that said that the NFL, because the ownership structure of the trust was running afoul of the NFL's rules, the league had fined the Seahawks $5 million. Now, Roger Goodell had later, the commissioner of the NFL, said that was a false report, that the fine did not happen. But it seems clear that pressure from the league, pressure from other owners was happening. The Trailblazers, as you say, sold for over $4 billion, and that deal is expected to close in the coming months. Now, this is an interesting interview that happened before the Super Bowl, but I think it's very pertinent today. Bert Kolde, who's the team's vice chair, big guy in Vulcan, the Paul Allen organization, he answered some questions from reporters, and this is according to reporting by your colleague at the Times, Bob Condata. And Bert Kolde, to a question of whether there is a reason for concern that the team could be bought by an owner who would want to move it. Cold noted that the Seahawks lease at Lumen Field runs through 2031. A spokesman for the Paul G. Allen estate also confirmed there are 3 10-year options on the lease following 2031. So asked if he thought the Super Bowl title would enhance the value of the team, Cold said, I can't predict that, but I think the Celtics helped, the win helped the Celtics franchise price. Now, the Celtics sold last year for $6.1 billion. But The Athletic points out that because the Seahawks are held in a trust, as the Broncos were, the Broncos also had an owner who passed, it's Jody Allen's fiduciary duty as executor of the estate to maximize the franchise value in a sale. That means the highest bidder will get the team. Mm-hmm. So this isn't a situation where Jody can wait around for a local ownership group with goodwill and a close ties to the or to the local community. This has got to be the highest bidder because that's just how the trust works. Which, if you're a Sonics fan,
it's a little PTSD.
If you're an Oakland, Raiders fan, there's a lot of concern, I think, although that there is that lease that goes through 2031 at Lumen. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And it's right for that to be the first thing a lot of people think. Reading back on some of the reporting from 2018 when shortly after Paul Allen died, it seems unlikely that there would be any kind of incentive by the other owners and the NFL to allow for a move. Seattle is a great market. The Seahawks make a lot of money. When the Seahawks make a lot of money, the NFL makes a lot of money. When the NFL makes a lot of money, the owners make a lot of money. And this, as the statement mentioned, this would have to be ratified by the owners. And as would a move. Whoever purchased it, if they wanted to move it, would have to get the support of the other owners. It just feels pretty far-fetched at this point. We have a great stadium, great foundation, great fan base. It really the Seahawks really dominate the entire Pacific Northwest up to Alaska. Go to Alaska, huge Seahawks fan.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know what it says exactly in Paul Allen's will or the kind of legal implications, what can or can't happen. But as far as just sort of pure dollars and cents, it doesn't make a lot of sense right now for them to move. But who knows in 20 years.
And trying to think of another market that could support, we talked a little bit before air, San Diego lost its football team recently, but I don't see that as being
San
as
Antonio,
profitable.
But we got the Cowboys and Texans. I don't know.
A little back of the napkin math. Paul Allen bought the Seahawks in 1997 for $194 million. That is roughly, with inflation, double that. So it's almost $400 million in today's dollars. The low end of the range of estimates for what the Seahawks will sell for is, $8 or $9 billion. Yeah. So he and his estate have grown that investment by a factor of 20, David.
Not bad.
There's not that many investments grown by a factor of 20 at this point. And remember, it was like a huge taxpayer investment to build what is now Lumen Field. The Seattle Weekly put the tab at close to $1 billion all told, $300 million for the actual construction, $291 million in interest, and then tens of millions for sales tax deferment for Paul Allen, $205 million for Kingdome debt with interest, $168 million to build stadium freeway access improvements. So when you're talking about where would the Seahawks go to another market that has, the kind of caliber of stadium and the investment from the public, it's hard to see.
Not to mention, Paul Allen bought the Seahawks kind of at the urging of the state government at the time. They basically came to him and said, please buy the Seahawks. So
Ken Behring was moving the
exactly.
Seahawks to Southern California. The moving trucks were packed and going to Anaheim. They had locked the headquarters in Kirkland.
And so, who wants to be the owner that who's buys the Seahawks from the Paul Allen estate and then does exactly the opposite thing of why he owned them in the first place? That's that would be a big emotional lift. Who am I to put anything above people who have $9 billion to throw around? Maybe they don't care about that kind of thing, but there's an emotional weight to Paul Allen's ownership of the Seahawks as well.
All I'm asking is that if a bunch of guys from Oklahoma City roll into town, Jody, don't answer your phone, Jody.
Pull up the drawbridge.
Pull up the drawbridge. Moving on to our second story in Front Page.
My overriding goal is that whoever you are and wherever you come from, if Seattle is your home, then this is your city, and there is a place for you here.
Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson gave her first State of the City speech yesterday. This was at the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute in the Central District. She focused on affordability and public safety in her comments. I watched the speech online, but David, you were actually there in the room. Mm-hmm. What stood out to you about what the message that the mayor had and her priorities for the city?
A few things. Yes, she talked about affordability, but it wasn't what she led with. Right after she was elected, she told me, she understands that she's going to be judged on public safety and homelessness above everything else. And so I think it was fitting that those were the first two things she led with. She talked about the two students who were murdered near Rainier Beach High School, and she talked about the fact that basically nobody can look at how the city has handled homelessness and think it has done a good job. So I think she continues to understand that those are in a lot of ways her top two priorities. And the other thing that stood out to me is, I know there's been a lot of attention paid to the fact that she's a socialist or has identified as a socialist. Of course, a lot of the outside, kind of more conservative media paints her in kind of radical terms. But if you listen to this speech, it was not altogether different than what you hear from most or at least recent Seattle mayors when they give these states of the city. She talked about reaching out to business and working well with everybody and kind of this, frankly, it was sort of a moderate tone. And on some of the thorniest questions, and we could get more into it, around homelessness particularly, and this question of police surveillance cameras around the city, she is really kind of walking the line between the competing arguments on these two approaches in a way that certainly does not suggest, at least so far, Katie Wilson is governing as some radical who's going to, turn Seattle into a socialist, jurisdiction or whatever it might be. Again, she sounds kind of like the other Seattle mayors that I've covered.
Yeah, she talked a little bit about those CCTV surveillance cameras, the expansion, which she was critical about on the campaign trail. A number of elected folks who have taken office, Erica Evans, Eddie Lynn, vocally saying that they don't agree with this expansion. I'm going to play just a little bit about what Wilson said here about the cameras.
I know this is a contentious issue, and I want to get it right and not rush to a particular deadline. So my team and I will continue to dig in, meet with people who have different opinions, and try to find the best way forward.
Basically, she had said, I've talked with people whose families were affected by gun violence and, that they're still going to continue to look at this. I did want to ask you, David, a little bit more about the affordability issue. Mm-hmm. Childcare is a big point of affordability that she's talked about a lot. Obviously, her parents helping her with some of her childcare needs during the campaign became a big story.
She cracked a joke about that.
She cracked a joke that most people don't have that become, national headlines. She talked a little bit about how Pike Place Market was the result of kind of a big civic push to make groceries more affordable or available to people at the turn of the century. That was an interesting walk down, history lane. Do we get a sense of what affordability measures she's actually going to be pursuing here? I mean, maybe a public grocery store?
Yeah, I think Pike Place is a good example because, and there's a reason she chose it, because it represents this kind of marriage of government and, I don't know what you call it, free market business, which is that it was kind of government intervention that allowed this kind of thriving entrepreneurial stretch to exist. And I think that, if you could kind of box Katie Wilson into a philosophy, it might be something like that. When she was talking about housing, she sounds, on the one hand, very urbanist, very kind of acknowledging and talking about how she wants to go bigger and bolder to allow more density, developer-led density to allow more housing, and at the same time is one of the most vocal backers of social housing and city-funded affordable housing, and talking about how those two things need to work together to create affordability. And I think grocery stores is another example. Maybe it's city-owned land with a private operator existing on it, whatever it might end up being. It is all very Katie Wilson. I would also point out, again, not all that different than mayors we've had in recent history. Mayor Bruce Harrell struck similar tones at times. Mayor Jenny Durkin did as well. So, I think she uses some different language. She likes to talk about how Seattle can't be afraid to do big things. But as far as what we've heard from a policy perspective, there so far, and it's quite early, I will acknowledge that, we haven't heard anything that I would say is the clear Katie Wilson agenda that is radically different than what we've seen from recent mayors.
Yeah, the 1,000 units of new shelter by the end of this year, that was the first time I had heard that number, but she specifically, you've mentioned she's thrown that out a few times before that you've seen. But I mean, that is, I think, indisputably going to be the metric by which she's judged, because that was such a huge way that she was able to differentiate herself from Bruce Harrell and say that Bruce Harrell had failed. So,
and it's setting a really high bar in a really specific way that other mayors haven't done, and in some ways, it's probably political malpractice to do that, because it's so specific. If there are not 4,000 units by the end of her term, people are going to say she's a failure, and fairly, because she has set this number for herself. It is also, I think, indicative of her approach to this job, which is we need to first define what it is we need, and then only after we've done that, figure out how we are going to get there. The how we are going to get there part is, of course, the difficult part. Seattle is facing a budget deficit. There's a limitation on how many more property tax levy the city can do. So I think in order to build that number of shelter units, and she teased some legislation around that, she's going to have to redirect some pretty significant funds from other parts of the city to make that happen. And so getting into the meat and potatoes of all that is what's going to define the mayor. Her mayor tenure.
We're running out of time for our final story in Front Page, so I'm just going to really quickly roll through.
We all have essentials we need to purchase, so I'm proposing the following. First, let's create a sales tax holiday. 18 states do this already, where for a limited period of time, people can buy certain items without paying any sales tax at all.
Okay, sales tax holiday. It's a recommendation that Governor Bob Ferguson talked about yesterday when he was discussing changes he wants to see before he gets behind state Democrats' planned millionaires tax. Ferguson says he wants to see also a greatly expanded small business tax cut, more people eligible for the working families tax credit. The state Senate on Monday passed its version of a tax on income over $1 million. That rate would be 9.9% on every dollar after the first million. So after the Seattle Times pays you, David Kroman, your first million, then every dollar after that. So that's all you have to worry about. Taxing the rich. It's so hot right now, but Ferguson says he wants some changes. What were your reflections on what he said yesterday?
It is politically popular, or it has been. Then there is the debate about to what end? Is it to fund new programming or to keep programming running, or is it to restructure Washington's tax code in a way that shifts the burden up away from kind of more middle income people onto the wealthy without adding new programming? Or is the point to expand things like more affordable housing construction? I think that's the ultimate debate. Ferguson seems to be leaning more towards the rewriting of the tax code, while some legislators want to keep it and use it for programming. Yeah,
tax relief and actually fulfilling this idea that we're going to, not be the second most regressive tax code in the country. By the way, the millionaire's tax would apply to an estimated 30,000 Washingtonians. It would generate about $3.5 billion annually. Of course, a lot of people, especially Republicans, saying this is not going to stick with millionaires. Right. This is going to expand like every other income tax that in states where it has been instituted. It's also starting debate about whether people will leave. Mm-hmm. There's the billionaires tax idea in California that is possibly going to the ballot there this fall that has reportedly driven people like Mark Zuckerberg to buy places in Miami. Other people say, well, if we're not going to tax these wealthy folks, if they're, going to be able to avoid taxes by living here anyway, why do we care if they go? Right. But it's definitely that debate ongoing here. And, you can start looking for your real estate in Miami too. Yeah. Just looks very nice
Seattle
there.
Times salaries.
David Kroman, such a pleasure as always to have you here for Front Page. We're going to continue talking about this millionaire's tax as it goes through the legislature in Olympia. And just always really appreciate your insight.
No, I love being here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.